And good afternoon, everybody. This is Tony Fapiano coming to you from the studio at Guilford Community Television. And I've been privileged to have a number of really special people to be on these programs over the years. But today I have a very, very special guest. I have Senator Edward Meyer, who has been our state senator for this district for 10 years now, 5 terms. And so let me start by introducing Donald. Let's get Ed on the... Let's switch over to Ed's camera. There we go. Ed Meyer, great to see you.
Well, Tony, you're always at the corner of Boston Street on our parades. And this Saturday we're having a parade, and you interview us, you put the mic in our face.
I'll be there Saturday.
And I bet you'll be there Saturday, so I look forward to doing this program with you.
Yeah, I've been doing that too many years, Ed,
right.
believe me.
You have, you do it well.
We make complete fools of ourselves, but we have a great time doing it.
It's a real party.
But it's part of Guilford, so
Yeah,
I enjoy doing that. But I really enjoy these one-on-ones.
Yeah.
And you know, your years of public service, not only to the town of Guilford, but going way back to your very, very early years involvement, have been so interesting to me in that the transition and the people that you've met and the involvement that you've had over the years has been phenomenal. So with your permission, we'll sort of do a chronological update from beginning to end. So what got you involved or interested in public service?
Well, I was actually a lawyer in New York City, and I wanted to be a litigator, trying cases. And the best way to learn that, get that experience, was to become a prosecutor. And so Robert Kennedy was the Attorney General of the United States, and I applied to be a federal prosecutor. And
how'd you make that connection? I mean, there have been a lot of people probably vying for that spot.
It was a competitive position, but I was with a very good law firm and got a lot of good backing from my law firm to do it. And he was the Attorney General, and I got accepted. And one day, my immediate boss, Bob Morgenthau, who was the United States Attorney in New York City, called me and said that the Attorney General and he wanted to appoint me as Chief Federal Prosecutor of the Vito Genovese family of the Mafia.
Wow.
So my life was changed.
I'll say.
All of a sudden I had dozens of agents, FBI, Treasury, Secret Service, postal agents working in organized crime.
Or to help you, I'm sure, in what you were doing, but did you have any fear or any personal safety?
You know, the mob was not really a danger to prosecutors. They were a danger to informants. I had 4 witnesses murdered, actually, because the worst thing you can do within the mob is to inform. And I had some wonderful informants who had made cases for me, but 4 of them actually were murdered. So there was violence in that sense. But Bob Kennedy was, he was after Jimmy Hoffa and he was after the mob.
Those are some great give and take between the two of them.
Right. Yeah. So he really inspired us. He expected us to work 6 days a week. You have to work every Saturday. And he was wanted a lot of accountability in terms of what you're doing. He was also a big touch football fan, I got to tell you. When our office had to have a touch football team.
Is that right?
And I had to play on it. And in fact, I was, in those days, I was an end. I was a right end, a receiver. And
you're tall enough, that's for sure.
And we played.
You look like you could suit up right now, by the way.
Thank you. We played the Nassau County Highway Department in a night game in our first game of that year. And I came off a 3-point stance to go out and catch a pass on first down. And the Nassau County big guy, transportation guy, came across with his elbow in the first play of the game and broke my jaw. So Bob Kennedy heard about this.
This wasn't related to a case you were working
on. No, we won the game, but I got a call in my office saying that the Attorney General expects me to be back for the next game. So he was an amazing guy, and I was back for the next game.
Now, did you know him personally on a personal level?
He was in Washington. I was in New York City, and he came to our office quite frequently, particularly because of his focus on organized crime. And there were, at that point, 5 mafia families, of which the Genovese was the most significant part of the family. So we got to know him, and he was the toughest boss I've ever had in my life.
Yeah, he was a hard worker too. So
I've been working for about 60 years, and he's the toughest boss I ever had.
Yeah.
And
Besides your wife.
And besides my wife, he demanded a lot of accountability and a lot of spirit. And then when his brother was killed, when President Kennedy was killed, you saw this tremendous transformation in Bob's personality. I mean, he became, instead of this hard driving guy, he became totally empathetic with people. He identified with people's problems. He became very soft compared to what he'd been before.
Really?
Oh gosh, what a change! And he came to New York and he ran for the United States Senate in New York and won that race, and then ran for president in 1968. We all helped him. I was actually a Republican at the time, helping him. He was.
I knew there was something I liked about you.
But he was a changed person, and he probably, but for the fact he was killed in that Los Angeles hotel room, he probably would have been president of the United States.
It was a big win for him. And
Yeah.
then, as he said, now let's go on to Chicago.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's win there.
Right.
So if he had done that, certainly he would have been moving forward. That's. I'm trying to think who he was actually competing against within the Democratic Party.
Well,
at
he
that
was
point.
competing against Gene McCarthy.
Humphrey.
Hubert Humphrey in part, but the big candidate was actually Senator Gene McCarthy of Wisconsin over the Vietnam War. McCarthy was a one-issue candidate in 1968.
Right.
Lyndon Johnson was president. Lyndon Johnson pulled out of the campaign because of the Vietnam War. And eventually, when Bob Kennedy came into the race after Johnson pulled out, he came in as an opponent of the war as well.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to think. I mean, obviously, his whole life changed when his brother. I mean,
It
plus
did.
his father had the stroke, and
That's
and
right.
he passed away, and just things were different.
Very, very different. Big family, of course, and and one of the coincidences is that my life has got bookends on it, in a sense. My first public activity was for Robert Kennedy.
Yeah.
And now another Kennedy seeks to
take your
take my
seat.
place. So bookends.
Now, let's talk about that for a minute, and I'm going to go back and forth in time.
Yeah.
Both you and Representative Woodlitz are very, very well connected in Hartford, obviously. You've served on all the important committees. You know all the right people. You've done a tremendous job for the town of Guilford, and in your case, probably the other towns that you represent as well. I'm not familiar with that, but both of you are retiring in the same year. Did you have any indication at all that she would be leaving the same time you did, and what impact that may have on the town?
Well, Pat has actually been our state rep for 20 years. And she has talked, in the 10 years that I've been state senator, she has talked about leaving, and she's talked about conversations with her husband Gary about that. So I knew that it was in her mind. We didn't have any plan to retire together. And it'll be a big loss for this district losing Pat. Big loss for the state, because she's been chair of our finance committee, in charge of so many significant.
Yeah. But you too,
and
the stuff you're involved
well,
in.
I have been too, as chair of the environment committee. But Tony, I really believe in term limits. I introduced a bill for term limits, and I couldn't get it on the committee agenda. But I felt that that Connecticut senators should have a 4-year term instead of 2-year term. I thought we'd do a better job with a 4-year term, but we could only serve 3 terms.
So 12 years.
12 years, and state reps would be able to serve 12 years or 6 terms.
So why do you think that's a better way of doing it?
I think new blood is really important. The great majority of our districts, both of state reps and state senators, are one-party districts. And so the people have been there forever. Pat retained a freshness in what she did for all those years. But I will tell you, a lot of my colleagues are not fresh anymore.
Yeah.
And new blood is really important.
But regardless of who replaces the two of you, neither one of those people, whoever they happen to be, is going to have the influence that the two of you have in Hartford. So
well, you build that up.
What's the fallout for us?
Well, I think it'll be whoever it is. I think they'll grow into it, as Pat and I both did. You earn respect. It's a team thing. You work hard for your own caucus. You have a relationship with the governor, obviously. You're hopeful the governor will sign your bills if they pass. I've had governors veto some of my bills,
Really?
not a happy occasion.
Yeah.
You want the governor to approve the state grants you want for Guilford and the other towns in your district. And I've been fortunate with both Governor Rell and Governor Malloy have given us good grants here for Guilford and for the other towns that I represent. I represent actually 6 towns, 100,000 people.
Yeah, I guess that's my point, that you guys have been so successful, both of you. Now, you know, these guys are the new people, whoever they are going to have to build, and
They are.
You start to get that same momentum going for them.
They're going to have to build some seniority and some respect. And, you know, all the candidates on both sides, Republican and Democrat, this fall are very respectable. So
Now, go back a little bit. When you started locally, I think you were on the Economic Development Commission, were you not, in Guilford?
I was right here in Guilford. Yes, I did that. I found out that commission was not that economically development oriented.
I was on it too.
Right.
I understand what you're saying.
Right.
Yeah.
I got very excited about going on that commission. I was a new resident to Guilford. I could see the property tax problems here, and some new business would really help. And I got on the commission and found, you know.
Yeah, it's your 3 steps forward, 4
Right,
steps back,
right,
sideways.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to do in this, but at the same time, it's, you know, the town of Guilford has maintained its character, if you will.
It has.
I don't know how you define character. You know, everybody has their own perception of what character is, but it has maintained that, and part of the reason they've maintained it is made it difficult for things to change too quickly.
It has. Well, you know, Patty
And I respect that.
Patty Ann and I moved here in 2001 from Chappaqua in New York, and we love this town.
You were in Chappaqua?
We were in Chappaqua.
Which is where Bill and
Hillary
Hillary
Clinton, we got to know them.
Yeah.
Hillary ran for the United States Senate and asked me to help in her campaign, and I did, but they were no treasure having in Chappaqua. Their motorcades really drove us out of the place. They would have 8-car motorcades, each of them, which when they would come into town, which was frequently, you couldn't get around the little town of Chappaqua.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting, because I actually, there's a local business from Chappaqua, a men's clothing store called Britches.
Yes.
You know Britches?
I bought.
He actually looked at space.
These pants are probably from there.
He looked at space in Guilford, and he was saying the same thing, that Bill Clinton was a regular shopper in his store.
Yeah.
He said, I didn't want him. It cost me money for him to come in and buy a suit, because they had to shut everything down for so long.
Right.
You know?
But he's a marvelous conversationalist, Bill Clinton. You know, there's a store in that's a little deli called the Little Store in Chappaqua, and he holds forth in the Little Store regularly, and people can't wait to hear his stories and chat with him. So
yeah,
when you meet you meet his wife, you can't believe they're married. They're so different.
there were times they probably didn't believe it either.
Right. I think that's right.
Not going to go there.
Right.
Not going to go there.
Right.
But bottom line, what brought you from New York to Connecticut? Now I know you went to Yale. You both undergraduate and law school.
And law
correct?
school too. We decided that that we'd wanted to kind of phase down in my life. I did a lot of things politically in New York. I'd just been offered, when we left, I've been offered the Democratic nomination to become district attorney. And Patty Ann and I talked about that, and we thought that the last child, we have 6 children, the last child had just left for college, and it was just us and the dog, our Labrador retriever named Mo. And so we decided to kind of phase down. I had such a busy law practice, private law practice, as well as public life in New York. And then the nomination for district attorney came along. We're going to leave. And so we started looking on the eastern seaboard. We went as far south as North Carolina. And then finally, with children, grandchildren close by here, son Jeff, who's now a federal judge, lives in Stony Creek.
Okay.
And we have 2 grandchildren in Stony Creek as well. My Yale connections were nice, and I thought maybe I'd get a job at a Yale or some other college teaching, and I'd be out of politics.
Were you familiar with the shoreline because of your years at Yale?
I did know it, and I was on the Yale tennis team, and I played some exhibitions up here on the shoreline, so I knew the shoreline pretty well. But Patty Ann had a condition. she would not move to a town unless when we went down the street, people said hello. And so when we first walked down past Pages, next to the green.
Good morning, good afternoon.
People said hello.
Yeah, and they don't know you,
Wow,
you didn't know them.
no,
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah.
And so she said, this is the town for us.
Yeah, this is definitely that town.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is definitely that town.
So getting out of politics didn't work.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned Patty. At that point, obviously, your children were grown, so you had been married for a number of years. You have
Right.
6 children.
Yes, we do.
I read. And how many grandchildren? And
13.
13.
And
Wow.
still growing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And still going.
Still going.
Now, it's interesting how the two of you met. Now, you were an attorney, and you were involved in the sports field, I think, as part of your
I was
practice.
particularly tennis. I represented Jimmy Connors, toughest client I ever had. Some other men tennis players, Ely Nastasi, and about 30 women, of which my wife was one. My wife was an original member of the Virginia Slim Circuit with Billie Jean King. 16 young women started out in the late 60s. In the Virginia Slim Circuit, and Patty Ann was one of them, and I was at Wimbledon.
You weren't married at that point.
We were not married at that point, and in fact, I had to meet with the women tennis players I was representing, and I wanted to hold a press conference. And I was just getting to know them in a hotel ballroom in London, and I needed a spokesperson at the press conference. And this one woman could speak very well, very articulate. And that's the woman I married.
Wow. Interesting. But what did she think of you? You saw her as an asset, but was it mutual?
Oh, it was very mutual, and she actually was married for a short time to another tennis pro, and that broke up, and she called me sometime after that, and we met each other, through the attorney-client relationship, and we dated for a while, and it worked, and
that's great.
We're husband and wife now for 36 years.
Fantastic.
Yeah, long time.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's really great. That's interesting to get that background out.
And then tennis has become a thing in our life, and one of our hopes is
I hear you're still a pretty good tennis. You play with Stableford, right?
Yeah,
Bill Stableford,
right.
Yeah.
We, Patty Ann and I played tennis in New York. We played mixed doubles, and we actually ranked number 2 in New York State in mixed doubles. And then we've continued that, and we're going to play senior husband and wife doubles. And we have entered the national tournament in Charlottesville, Virginia this December. And we're entering the national grass court senior tournament in La Jolla, California in March. And the reason we're able to do this at our age, because I'm almost 80, is that there's a new tournament called the 140s. You and your spouse have to have a combined age of 140. We make that.
Okay.
And we could be tough in the 140s.
well, that this. I guess this gives me a hint as to why you've decided to leave politics at this point. You're opening up, or you're getting re-involved again with stuff that you love. But my next question to you is, what brought you to that conclusion that it was time to retire?
Well, it's actually a tough decision.
I mean, you're talking going back to the 60s now.
Right.
Public service.
Right. Patty Ann had a major influence in this. Several years ago, she said to me, please don't run for office when you're 80, in your 80s. Well, I'm going to be 80 next April. So.
Yeah, but in your case, it's just a number because you're physically in excellent condition.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at 80, you're in better shape than a lot of people, maybe at 70.
Thank you, Lord. Yeah.
So it's just a number, really. I mean, it's really how you feel and your health and your mental attitude and your energy level.
But Tony, you know public life. This is a 7-day-a-week job. Literally 7 days a week. I've been doing it a long time. We've got 13 grandchildren all over the country. I mean, they're in Texas, Illinois, Georgia, and Connecticut. And you know, it's time to move on, I think. And and Patty Ann's you know, quest for me not to serve in the '80s makes some sense.
Yeah.
So we'll have those grandchildren. We'll have our tennis.
What do the
Be
kids
able to
say about
travel.
it? Because the kids know
No,
that you've been involved
Yeah,
so
they
deeply
do.
for so long.
The kids are very supportive of this. Now we have changed our life a little bit in the last couple of months. We have just bought we bought 2 8-week-old puppies, Labradoodles, and they're now a little bit older. But that, you know, that's parenting again.
Yeah.
We're parents again.
I have a dog that's pretty demanding also. I know what you're talking about.
When I left to come here to the studio, those puppies were taking their afternoon nap, you know. So.
All right. So it was time.
So it was time.
But how do you feel about it?
I feel very good about it.
Actually, how do you think you're going to feel when somebody steps into your chair in the General
Well,
Assembly?
I think I'll always think publicly. I mean, I'll always think about issues. I'll be contentious. Whoever my successor is, I will be on their case. You know, and so I will always be a public person, and you know, it's just a part of my life. Ever since I went into the Justice Department.
In the 10 years in Connecticut, what has, and just maybe for advice for the next guy that takes your seat, or your woman, or whatever, what is the relationship that the state senator has with the local administration, with the first selectman's office in Guilford and the first selectman and the mayors, and because you represent, what, 6 towns, I think?
Right.
What's your relationship, and what can you do? What can you not do?
Well, it's a good question, Tony. I have served under at least 2 first selectmen, under Carl Balistraci and under Joe Mazza.
Yeah.
And here's what those 2 people do, as well as the other local government officials in my district. They call you and say, Ed, there's a horrible bill. It's going to cream Guilford. I want you to vote no on it.
So, and you say?
And I say, well, I'm going to look at it carefully. And if I've got some concerns about it, I'm going to call you back. But you know, they're on our case to check us on bad legislation. The second thing they do is Joe and Carl will call and say, you know, we've got a real problem here with streets that are flooding, and we need your help to get the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection to approve some street changes, and also to help with some money. And or the town dock in Guilford was really banged up by one of our bad storms, and the first selectman called me and said, Ed, can you get us $500,000 for this?
Oh yeah.
And we did. You know, Pat and I were able to do that. And
it looks great, by the way.
So yeah, doesn't the dock look great?
It looks fantastic.
Yeah. But those relationships with our local government,
so they would call you.
Is very tight.
They've called you.
They've called
complained about certain things, or asked you for certain favors, or asked you to look into something, or
Yes.
whatever. Now, do you call them when you see something going on locally that you may or may not agree with?
We do call them.
I know you've been in public at the Board of Education. I've seen you on GCTV at Board of Ed meetings.
Right.
So you deal with the superintendent and that board.
We do. I mean, the Common Core has been an issue in Connecticut,
Yeah.
and therefore I've got a very strong education background in New York. For 23 years, I was a member of the State Board of Regents,
Yeah.
very involved in education. So education is a great priority to me. I think we turn this state around if we educate people better. So I keep in touch with the Board of Ed. You know, Joe Mazza, I think if he was here, he'd probably tell you, I call him about once a month, if not more, with concerns I have over this and that. You know, I called Carl Balistraci just the other day. He's a selectman here in Guilford, because I was very concerned that there's no place that our dogs can swim. There's no ordinance in Guilford we never know about saying no dogs on the beach. Well, we have 2.
Don't tell anybody, but I go early in the morning with mine.
Where? Off the record, where?
Jacobs Beach.
Oh, so I live very close to the beach on Daniel Avenue, the Indian Cove, and I swum there with my dogs for 12 years. And all of a sudden I showed up just last week. There's a big sign, no dogs. Yeah. And I talked to Rick, our parks and person and recreation person, and he said, oh, we're following the ordinance of Guilford that no dogs can go on the beach. So I got very upset by that, and I ran into Carl Ballstation.
You're not alone.
Yeah.
This is a dog town.
Good.
This is a dog friendly. I mean, you walk your dog in the morning or almost any time on the green, there's going to find 5 or 10 or other.
We live on the shoreline.
Yeah.
And for the town to say you can't have a dog, they can control where you have the dog. And Carl and Joe apparently have talked now about this, and we're going to get some reasonable compromise.
And I hear this dog park maybe under discussion as well.
Yeah, right.
Some other things. But so that's important. I mean, that's an important thing, obviously, if you're a dog lover.
Right.
But
those
things
are the kind
that
of
you
things
see
you
happening
do.
with economic development or planning and zoning or
Right.
Board of Finance or whatever,
Right.
that you say, boy, how could that be? Why are they doing this?
Right.
Or why shouldn't they do this a little bit better or differently?
Yeah.
Can you get involved?
Another example of a call to our first selectman has been Lake Quantipogue. The southern end of Lake Quantipogue is becoming a marsh. It's weeding over. In fact, and the weeds actually are going even on the beach.
Right.
And so, I started talking to our local government here in Guilford about how we can repair that. I brought in the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. And
I just interviewed Joe, by the way, last week. He mentioned that.
Yeah, right.
That is an issue.
This is a big issue and a very expensive issue. And the town really can't afford. It'll cost maybe $1 million to take out those weeds in a permanent way. It's a major process. It will involve. If it doesn't cost $1 million, it will cause a lot of inconvenience because you're going to have to drop the level of the lake 6 feet in the middle of the winter and let the freeze kill the weeds.
Oh, that's how it would
kill
happen.
that.
So you
that's
do
the
it
way.
naturally.
That's you do it. You can do it. You can do it naturally.
Yeah.
Then the other way you can do is chemically, and that's very expensive.
But do you see things you'd like to comment on or get involved in, and maybe you stand back? Do you see things going on in town?
Oh yeah.
I mean, every citizen does.
Oh, I do. I do things, and if Patty Ann's not looking around, I might even join a board.
Let's talk about. I read, I think in the Courier a few months ago, you wrote an article about property taxes. You had a different angle on how town finances should be supported. Why don't you explain that?
Yeah, I came from New York, which is another high property tax state. And then I came to Connecticut and found out Connecticut has even higher property taxes in terms of the sources of revenue than New York. And I saw the effect the property tax was having on the bookends of our society, of young people and older people. Younger people couldn't move in here because they didn't have enough affordable housing. The property tax is too high. Older people, my age, your age to be, tough on the property tax. Guilford is doing its best. Guilford's doing better than other places to hold down the property tax. If you've got income of $100,000 or less a year, you can get a tax freeze. But so the first thing I did was, when I got elected in 2004, I put a bill in to mandate that the state would pay at least 10% of the cost of public education, the cost of our public schools, at least 10%. Couldn't get it through. I was told it was probably unconstitutional. Then I put a bill in, and I have a bill in now on this subject, to allow the towns, doesn't mandate the towns, but to allow the towns to impose another tax, like a local income tax. But my bill says, provided that for every dollar that the other tax, like an income tax, raises, the property tax will be reduced dollar for dollar. And so, in effect, what you do is you recognize that our ability to pay taxes is based not on our property, like it used to be on our farms, but it's based on our incomes. And that bill has gotten a lot of discussion. And actually, the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities told me that they support it, although they would not do it publicly.
Well, I could see where there's residual or there's a ripple benefit to that in terms of the business community.
Yeah.
Because if property taxes are lowered, or somehow lowered, that would encourage business to come into town.
It would.
And because now you're getting revenue from another source, not from...
It would, and you know, unlike New York, Connecticut imposes the property tax on businesses and on personal property, not just on real estate, real property, but on personal property, on your cars.
Yeah.
This is a very invasive
Now,
form
you know
of
I'm on
tax.
the legislative committee for the Connecticut Association
Yeah.
of Realtors. What would they say? When I go up there in the fall now to my next meeting, when that comes across what will they say about that? What would they find right or wrong with that?
What they're scared of, and
Looking at the other side now.
yeah, what the realtors are scared of, and what the legislators are scared of, is the feeling that this bill I'm proposing, Ed Meyer is trying to impose another tax on us, and he's
Well, you're just doing a redistribution.
but I'm doing a redistribution, taking it away from the property and
Right.
focusing on the income. And I keep saying that, and I point out that the language in the bill is very strict in that regard. But it scares people that it's another
You know what
form of
scared me, I
taxation.
think, in thinking it, now, this is the first time I'm really hearing the analysis of this, is that down the road, 5, 10, 15 years from now, the other tax is going to come back, and this one will still be here. The new one will be here. And all of a sudden, we're going to have two big taxes.
That's the fear that
Yeah.
that would happen.
And-
Nobody really trusts
Yeah.
politicians in this regard, and so my bill doesn't go anywhere.
But it's a tough state because of taxes. Because we have
It
every
is.
tax known to man,
You
just
do.
about. I, mean,
Right.
I don't
Yeah.
know what else we can, tax. And it's one of those things that if it's true that businesses are really, I mean, I'm listening to the campaigns now on TV. My God, don't they just shoot each other?
Right.
Right? I mean, it's gotten so awful.
Well, we passed a gun control bill. It'll stop that,
So-
hopefully.
But it is true that if their business is leaving,
Yeah.
that's not doing anybody any good anywhere.
Right.
We have to try to keep young people here, keep the old people here, keep seniors in town. We have to try to do all these things, and I don't.
So legislators of both parties are not addressing the property tax. One candidate for governor is proposing reducing the sales tax a little bit. But our problem is the property tax, I think. I think it's so ancient today to be imposing the tax based upon our property. And what it does...
And if you look at South Carolina or Florida or where businesses are moving to,
Yeah, right.
they have a much different tax structure on property.
They do, but of course they don't have the services we have.
Yeah.
I mean, we have much better
Or the
schools.
quality of life.
Yeah, and the quality of life.
Yeah.
We do have...
Well, let me ask you about another possible source of revenue. There was some discussion about tolls maybe coming back into Connecticut. What's going to happen? Do you see any future in that?
It's very complex because, and most people don't know this, that if we impose tolls on I-95 and I-91, for example, we will have to pay a huge amount back to the federal government for the tolls, for the transportation repairs they have been doing for years. Right now, the federal law really works against us putting tolls in because we would have to repay what the
You're
federal...
talking about back expenses
With-
or future, or both.
it would be back expenses from what the Federal Department of Transportation has paid to keep up the maintenance costs. Right now, this is federal law. They would have to pay it. That's why we haven't put tolls back, because we could put tolls back in a very technologically good way. You could go through at 65.
Yeah.
Go through the toll at 65 miles an hour.
Right.
But the financial formula is terrible because of the payback that would be required. And then in the future, we, the state of Connecticut, would have to pick up the maintenance, highway maintenance costs, which is big.
So what do you think will happen with it?
So everybody's studying it. We have another commission, Connecticut Love Studies.
Yeah.
We're doing we're going to get a report next year, and we're going to be able to discuss it again.
Yeah. In your 10 years, you've mentioned that you've had bills go through. Some were denied, some were not signed, but whatever. What are you most proud of?
Well, I'm probably most.
And it might not be one thing. I understand it might be.
One thing I'm very proud of is, and it's a very controversial bill, was that I was a prime sponsor of the repeal of the death penalty, Tony, because I looked at the death penalty and I said, I'm going to be a believer in the death penalty if it's stopping people from killing other people. And I looked into that.
It hasn't.
And I found it was not a deterrent. And I found that it was.
You're looking at it in a pragmatic way. You don't have any religious reason for that, or
no. I'm looking at it in a pragmatic way that it's not an effective law. It takes 20 years on the average from the time a person is convicted of murder until execution, and the uncertainty in the lives of the victims' families. I mean, we had dozens of victims' families come up and urge us to repeal the death penalty. They said, we've got uncertainty for 20 years while all these appeals are going on. The appeals were costing us on an average $4 million per inmate. Yeah, $4 million per inmate for the cost of the appeals. So
because they were on death row?
Because they were in death row and they have...
But what about people that get a life sentence? Aren't they going to try to get appeals? They're going to try to change that.
The history in Connecticut in this country is nothing like it on life sentences compared to taking a person's life. They're going to appeal every way they can. So, I've been a big sponsor of that, and secondly, as chair of the Environment Committee, I've been the chief sponsor of a lot of our environmental legislation. As for example. Climate change.
I'm going there next.
Yeah.
Do you believe it?
Putting in, I do believe it.
I mean,
I think the science is really on the side now.
It's debatable.
Yeah, it's been debatable, but almost 95% of the scientists are now on board and saying we're going through climate change, and that climate change is being caused in part by human conduct. And so I authored a bill a few years ago to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, which are viewed as a primary source of our climate change. And I'm very proud of that. I've also been a hawk on toxic chemicals. I'm the guy who
what's it? I don't know the word. It begins with an F. Go ahead, I interrupted you.
But we have lead poisoning, bisphenol A, cadmium, pesticides. The latest is really pesticides. And I passed a bill that actually prohibits the use of pesticides on school grounds in kindergarten through 8th grade. New York is going the whole way and prohibited pesticides right through high school. The more and more I've looked at pesticides, the more I'm convinced that they're highly toxic, and that there are organic ways we can treat our lawns. I'm a big believer in good lawns, so I want to be sure organics can do it. I believe organics can do it.
Okay.
So those are sort of the things in the environment that I've
you mentioned climate change. Obviously, the impact of climate change, if it goes the way it's going, is the impact that it has on the shoreline.
Right.
You live in a shoreline town. You represent a shoreline town, or several shoreline towns. That impacts where people live, if they're going to continue to live on the waterfront, and if they do live there, what it's going to cost for insurance. What their home is going to have to look like in terms of elevation and all of that. There's a lot of...
We're in the middle of a major dialogue on this in which the state has not done anything bold yet. I mean, if there are people, for example, including a resident of Guilford named Sid Gale, who has documented the fact that we have sea level increase. He took pictures 25 years ago, take pictures now. He's pointed out on the shore of Guilford that we have an increase. Yep. So there are strong people like him who are asking the state to actually take buildings down that are endangered by water, and we have not done that. What we've done is we've created an enterprise through the University of Connecticut that is encouraging people to build up or to build back or to use some natural dunes and vegetation to prevent wave invasion. But we haven't actually mandated anything in that regard over our concern for private property.
Well, it's interesting because, as you know, I'm in the real estate business,
Right.
but I'm seeing the impact of the marketability of waterfront property now. And what's going to happen is, in the long run, I think values are going to go down, and that impacts the grand list, ultimately.
It does.
And that impacts tax revenue from property taxes,
Right.
if the list is down. So the long-range ramifications of what we're doing right now, at least, unless it's done differently, is going to cost people. It's going to cost the town. It's going to cost people.
Well,
money.
you're absolutely right. I mean, when we've
one thing is connected
yeah,
to another.
we have a task force on this subject, of which I'm a member, and the task force is very concerned about the grand list, because if we come in, the state government comes in and says you can't build there, and this is prime property with a huge property tax revenue.
Yeah.
Or if we say you got to take it down.
And because we have small lots along the waterfront with septic systems, you move it. But where do you move it to?
Where do you move it to?
where
And you have an eminent domain issue, which is very controversial,
Yeah.
and you've got a grand list property tax revenue issue. So it's extremely complicated.
Yeah.
I have a feeling we're just going to let nature take its course, and the government is going to encourage but not mandate.
Yeah, it's going to be a long time, I think, before it really shakes out into something
Right.
confirmed, one way or the other. But you're right about Sid Gale. I mean, I was at Planning and Zoning a couple of meetings ago where there were some waterfront properties that were on the agenda, and he spoke and he said, "Look, you're approving this, but you have to let people know that in the future there's going to be a problem here." And yet, the commissioners on the Planning and Zoning Commission can only go by the facts that are put in front of them.
Right.
And what Sid has to say is not necessarily factual the way the engineers who represent the property owners have presented it. So, and I give him credit because he never lets up. Sid is out there. I know he's also been at hearings in Washington
Right.
in Hartford quite a bit.
He has been. But the first selectman a couple of months ago brought Representative Woodlitz and me around to streets in Guilford that flood. They don't just flood in times of huge hurricanes, but they flood in times of heavy rain.
Yeah.
And he said this is all new. And Jim Portley, our town engineer, corroborated the fact that this is a change. That these roads being flooded, like Quarry Road was one of them, being flooded just in terms of rainfall, is something that really represents change.
They're telling me we're approaching an hour pretty soon, aren't we? It's hard to believe. We haven't even gotten into my notes yet. This has been great, Ed. This has been really good.
It's fun to.
Let me ask you about the lobster industry in Connecticut, because that's, it's an agricultural state, it's an agricultural community, but the lobstermen are devastated. There's only a handful left, and things are getting worse. There's a moratorium now?
Yeah, so what happened was we had a terrific lobster population in Connecticut until 1998. And something happened in 1998 that wiped it out. And it's very frustrating for me as chair of the Environment Committee to tell you that I'm not sure what wiped it out. But there are two theories of what wiped it out. The first is that the lobstermen believe that it was wiped out by pesticides and insecticides coming in from people's lawns and property into Long Island Sound.
For the West Nile virus, they say.
Yeah, West Nile virus. And so the Environment Committee did pass a bill 2 years ago restraining the use of pesticides and insecticides in areas that were sensitive to the rivers and Long Island Sound. That has not worked. in terms of bringing back the lobster population. The second theory has nothing to do with pesticides and insecticides. It says that it's part of climate change. Our waters, they document, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection documents that our water in Connecticut, in this part of Connecticut, is actually several degrees warmer, and that the lobsters just don't take to it. They want colder water, and that's why Rhode Island and Maine are blooming.
They're booming.
Blooming with their lobster population, because their waters are colder than ours. But it's a very sad thing. It's wiped out people's jobs.
Which theory do you?
I don't know. I mean, when the lobstermen said to me it was pesticides and insecticides, you know, I immediately introduced a bill which did pass and the governor signed on that subject. But there's nothing we can do otherwise about the water temperature change. I mean, that is. I mean, that's the bigger picture of climate change. So we continue to have, you know, clams and oysters, and we have that's another issue, serious issue. How big should be the plots that the state allows the shellfish men to have, and they fight among themselves over their lots, and we have some lawsuits.
Well, it's tough because these guys grew up in this.
Yeah.
You know, many of them are second and third generation.
They are
in that industry.
They are.
And what do they do?
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
No.
what do you do? You know, you're
Right.
50 years old.
Right.
You're not really employable anymore.
Right.
You don't have the great education. You've been a lobsterman since
Right.
you were 14, working
Right.
with your father or your grandfather.
You've hit it. You're
it's
exactly
an awful
right.
situation.
Exactly, you've hit
Yeah,
it.
it's you know, and when you get into the people part of it,
Yeah.
the impact that it has on people and families,
Right.
you know, and the ability to put food on the table
Right.
and pay their taxes.
Yeah.
It's rough.
No,
You know, it's a rough situation. I know Bart in Guilford is you know, I mean, he was very involved. I think he was part of the Lobstermen's Association, and he's still very active. And tough situation. You know, I mean, fortunately, he's got that dock, and he put a little restaurant on it, and he's got revenue coming from that. But you know, I feel for these people.
We don't see any quick answer to it.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, there are probably in Connecticut only half a dozen lobstermen left.
Yeah.
Maybe not even that many.
Maybe not
now.
even.
Yeah.
And they're not doing what they used to do.
Right.
Even though there's so few of them, they're still
Right.
not producing the numbers that
Right.
they did before.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's you know, we didn't get into the impact of flood insurance when we were talking about what's going on with that total picture there. But flood insurance has gotten crazy because it's no longer federally subsidized, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. So
It's kind of a federal problem that we're victims here in the States because of it. And the definition of when you're susceptible to a flood insurance increase is very significant. You know, how do you define the water plane, the water level, to decide whether or not you're going to have much bigger flood insurance? And that's a little bit up in the air right now. We're looking for flexibility, so that thus far we've had very few people who have actually been evicted, have had to leave their homes because of the cost of flood insurance. But that is a danger.
it's tough.
we're
Tough
looking
situation.
at.
Again, it impacts the real estate business and the marketing of the property.
It does.
In an earlier part of this conversation, you mentioned that you were a Republican supporting Bobby Kennedy. But you've been a Democrat now for a great number of years.
I am.
I've heard that you're sometimes in the middle. I don't want to use the word, you use it, but you've been referred to on certain issues as a maverick, in that you're independently thinking and implying, you know, putting some sort of common sense on a situation as opposed to a political alignment or a party alignment. Yes?
Well, a legislature works best when there's a disciplined caucus.
That was a tough question, Sam. I'm sitting
So
with a senator
so
here.
I'm giving you a more complex answer. So, a legislature is really run by the majority party caucus, which right now in Hartford are Democrats, and therefore They have the responsibility of passing, the majority party has the responsibility of passing legislation. The minority party generally votes no, whether they're Republican or Democrats, they vote no on the budget because they want to have a contention. So I have recognized that my responsibility as a member of the majority party and generally voted with my party on most budgets, but I have broken on occasion. And there are several state budgets and several tax programs, including the big tax increase in 2011, that I voted no on because I felt that there was not, I voted no on that 2011 tax increase for two reasons. First, I didn't think we did enough of a job in cutting spending. We put too much on the tax increase. And secondly, I felt that the way we did the tax increase hit the middle class too hard. I favored a more graduated tax on higher incomes, people earning over $500,000. Mm-hmm. And I lost on that, both arguments. I argued in my caucus.
Makes sense to me.
For cutting spending more and for not a tax increase on the middle class, and I lost. So I am independent in that sense, and there have been other votes of that kind I've made as well.
Yeah. Now I've noticed, again, I've been on the legislative committee now at CAR for 10, 12 years, and your name comes up frequently, along with others, because of a leadership position or a committee that you're on or whatever. And
but Tony, you and I were chatting before the program started here about when is a good time to run for elective office, and I was saying to you that this age, in your 60s and 70s, is really prime time to run, because you can be independent. You can call it like you see it. You're not trying to run for the next office. You've got the wisdom of being older. And so I'm putting a kind of a message out there to our listeners to think about doing it at an older age. You can make the kind of independent votes that I have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm an independent. I'm
right.
an unaffiliated voter, and I appreciate that.
You're what we call a you.
Because I can be friends with you, and I can be friends with
right.
the Republican, and
right.
and I can agree or disagree with either one of you.
Right.
And I feel very comfortable doing that as an independent. And let's face it, the majority of registered voters in Connecticut are independent.
They are.
So I think there's a lot. That attitude permeates. Whether you're involved or uninvolved, it's a more comfortable position for a lot of people.
Right.
And I always like to see that. I really
right.
do. I like to see common sense applied to a situation rather than I have to do this because my party said it's the thing to
do. So I occasionally will take a position against my party on something like that tax increase. I've also taken some positions that my party won't accept. And that is, I talked to you about term limits. I introduced a bill on term limits, and I couldn't get that through. I introduced a bill after 4 of my colleagues in the Senate were indicted and convicted of crimes. I introduced a bill to create a Senate ethics committee, so we have a code of ethics. Never could get that bill through. Wow. Introduced it for 10 years and couldn't get it through. I've been very concerned about the way we redistrict our districts. It's done totally politically, in which the majority and minority parties get together. The Republicans and Democrats get together, and they get together to make each of their districts stronger. And so you have so few districts that are really two-party districts. You've got the same people being elected year after year after year. So I put in a bill to create an independent commission for redistricting every 10 years. Be no political people on it. Be independent people. Be independent. Couldn't get it out of committee.
Amazing, isn't it?
So.
All right, I think we've used our time, correct? We're at there. So my last question is, what's next? What's next for you?
Oh, gosh. Be a good citizen, see more of my grandchildren around the country, try to play some good senior tennis, continue to be active here in Guilford. I'll do it. And I've had such wonderful invitations from people to join nonprofit organizations, on the board, like the Shoreline Arts Alliance, the Connecticut Fund for the Environment, those kind of things. So there's so much out there to do.
Yeah.
And,
especially in the town of Guilford or towns like
yeah,
Guilford, where
right.
there's so many nonprofits and so much volunteerism
Yes, right.
that takes place. You know, I've always said, you remove volunteerism out of Guilford, I don't know what our taxes would be. If you had to replace all those volunteers
Yeah.
with paid people,
Right.
phenomenal.
It's marvelous volunteer, the shoreline.
Well, I wish you all the best. And
Well, thank you,
you
Tony.
for the people watching and for everyone in the area for the 10 years that you've given here and the 50 years of public service. So
Thanks, Tony.
with that, it's been great. And thank you
Very
for this
nice.
interview. I
Okay.
appreciate it.
Enjoyed it. as
Okay.
usual.
With that, now if somebody wants to contact you and say, Ed, there's an opening on such and such a commission, do they know where to find you?
Let me smell the roses for a few months.
But do you think that's an option in the
I
future?
do.
You do?
I do, but I want to smell the roses for
Good for you.
a few months.
All right, way to go. With that, this is Tony Fapiano. Thank you for watching.
Boy, that went fast. Wow.
Would we do a little over an hour probably, huh? Yeah. Yeah, we went over the hour. You were trying to keep us under the hour.